Viewers, welcome back to the second segment of our True Talk Thursday podcast. I want to remind you all before we do turn back to Maria to continue the conversation, if you like what you hear and want to learn more about other issues within education, then please feel free to subscribe below or tune in next week, Thursday at 7 p.m. We thank you for joining.
So, Evelyn, we were talking about how, some states they haven't missed a beat, right? And others, they're still, at square one. And you mentioned about the resources that are involved with states, but not just the resources, but how they utilize those resources. Right. I think that's super important to be able to understand, about the utilization of the resources and how making, teachers and administrative priority when it comes to the vaccine. So can you talk just a little bit more about what you're hearing from members about how some states are doing, phenomenal jobs and how other states maybe can, pick up some tips on the collaboration piece?
I think the biggest, I think the biggest thing is the testing and the tracing and the mitigation. What happens is if we're testing, people are feeling safe. If, the vaccinations we have to really push the vaccination piece, because people like in New York City, many of our teachers are being vaccinated. They, the UFT is working with the CBO and the mayor and the Department of Ed. So everyone is in on it. Everyone's getting vaccinated. People are afraid also about the vaccination. We can talk about that also later on, but the issue is the tracing, the contact tracing, the vaccination, the social distancing. Why? And if you go to some states, people weren't wearing masks. Let's be honest. I went to a state, and I went to Florida when I came out of New York, and when I went there, I went out just to get groceries, and people walking around without masks in the middle of the pandemic, and I was like, what's going on? Why is, people are nuts. Why are they not wearing masks? And it scared me. So what I think people is, how do they trust their school? How do they trust the government? Do they trust the government or don't they? And who are the people that are not doing? Who are the people that don't want to get vaccinated? Who are the people that are distrusting? Are the people of color, the brown, the African American? They don't want the vaccines. They don't. So I think it's a conglomerate of many things, but I think trust is a big thing. Resources is a big thing. And people have to learn how to advocate for what they want and what they need. And our members have to come together, being in one accord and saying, this is what my school, this is what Maria's school needs, this is what her teacher needs, this is what our administrator needs, and this is how we can do it together. But we have to advocate and trust and collaborate as a team with our community and our parent-based communities. We all have to come together. And that's not necessarily happening all over America.
Yeah, I'm really glad you bring up the trust factor, because, I've been sharing with folks, as I'm sure you have. It's like, there's the confianza is low. And when you have a low confidence level because of, the narrative changing from 1 day to 1 hour. And so what happens is, you don't know who you can trust, let alone put confidence in. And as we know, it's like, the children that we are talking about, these families that we're talking about, this is my family, this is your family. This is, and so we take that, with the highest of regard. And so when you feel like you haven't been given the full scope, when you walk, like you said, when you walk outside and people aren't wearing masks, you're thinking, well, what, right? How do they trust? Why is it that I don't trust? Right. It's like all those questions come into play, and they're natural because, we're human beings. We go by what we know, and some of us, we call faith by what we don't know, right? Right. And so, it's just so interesting to me about, like, when we started, how did we get there? And I think you hit it on the head by saying it's not just that one thing, right? It's so many different variables that came into play that it's going to take a minute for people to gain back that confidence, that trust, to be able to say, I think I'm going to stay remote. It's already February, and it's almost the end of February. You might be opening school next week, but I'm just going to keep my child at home for the rest of the school year.
Yeah.
Are you hearing that from your members? Because I know we're hearing that from ours.
Yeah. So it's interesting you said that. So we were thinking at the AFT, Randy was thinking about how are our members feeling? So what we did was we took a national poll of teachers, of paraprofessional, of school support personnel. And I don't know if you've seen the results, but they painted a very clear picture. And first, it said let me just look at the setup. More than 8 out of 10 AFT educators support a return to in-person learning with safety guardrails in place. Our members want to be, people want to go back. Our members want to be in the classrooms, but they want to be safe. Just 16%, 1 in 6, think their school system has gone too fast for reopening. So 60% feel we're opening
Too fast.
Right, hold on, let me just get 85% would be comfortable working in classrooms if the union, the AFT safety recommendations were followed and funded. So it goes back again, as you said, to the funding and the trust. And the vast majority, 4 out of 5, say remote learning is not working as well as in person. What about your members? What are they saying?
You know, the same kind of thing. It's like, you know, people want, they want the schools to open, of course, because, you know, that's where there's so many, again, factors that are involved in that, right? But it always comes down to the same thing. And that is, there's got to be a plan in play to make sure that, number one, it's safety first. That's always been, even before pandemic. I mean, you know, you can't, as an administrator, and you know this, even as teachers, we get to a point sometimes where we have this comfort level, right? We keep moving showing up every day, doing what we do. It's like an automatic pilot. And then something happens. And now it's like, oh my gosh, we got to do something. We don't ever want to go through that again. Now, I know it's not the same, but it's any kind of trauma, because that's what's happening. It's traumatic. And so I think about that when our members say it's always been safety first, that is a very true statement. So they're behind the safety pieces as well. I'm curious, Evelyn, you know, when we have, you talk about the number of members that we have and the population of, let's face it, the predominance of teachers in America are white and female. That's a stat, and I'm sure you have that in your survey. That's a stat. The predominance of children in our schools are not. And so there's a reckoning with numbers too, right? That's the narrative part that I think is so important, the confianza, the confidence that we talked about. Because I know even in my own family, my son will tell me in a heartbeat, Mom, Marino is staying home for the rest of the school year. And he lives in a predominantly white, very high up, you know, and he worked his tail off to be able to put his children in a school where he thought he could get the best education possible, as any parent would. We all strive for that, right? We do with what we have as best we can. And so I think about that, and it really does, you know, it's one of those areas where it's like, how do we start to build that, going back to that trust and that confidence level? Because the survey is astounding to me, right? When we know that it's time to get them back in, but it's always been at the forefront of our members, you know, the tip of their tongues, and will always continue to be. Safety is always first.
Yeah, you know, it's amazing that you said that about, you know, the trust factor in our teachers and, you know, all they've been through, and your administrator, you know, your members, your administrator. So I've been really troubled about the current narrative, the blame game, like who's to blame? You know, when I see educators who are pouring their hearts out, trying to teach children under the most trying circumstances of their professional lives, and parents know this, your members are going through it too. You know, what I don't understand is why on earth are fancy commentators like the Wall Street Journal editorial board blaming teacher unions for what Donald Trump, Betsy DeVos disastrous response to a devastating pandemic, and not, you know, and blaming teachers and blaming that we, you know, teacher unions don't want to open up, which is not true. Our president, Randy Weingarten, says it's not only wrong on the facts, it's an awful way to treat those tasked with making sure the next generation has the freedom to thrive. That's our big, that is our big picture. How do we thrive? We all have a right and a legal responsibility to thrive. So we're facing a school reopening crisis, right? Because in too many districts, we don't have the resources to make schools safe. That's why we need, and you and I and every member that's hearing our voices, we need to pass the 1.9 trillion bill sitting in the United States right now. So your superintendents know it more than anyone because they do the books, they do the bills, they have to run their schools, and they know. So, so of course, we also need to recognize that students and teachers are already in schools across, schools are open, like you said, across the country, and many systems have been open since the fall. So as you say, some have already opened, some know what they're doing, but the equity is the issue. The lack of equity, that some are doing well and some are not. Why is that?
Yeah.
And that's the narrative that we need to look at. That's the narrative that if we pass this bill, the $1.7 trillion, $1.9 trillion bill, we then can look at the resources and come and do the right thing, not put a Band-Aid on it, do the right thing.
Yeah, I think you hit it. It's like the blame game. It's like we opened up by saying, looking in the rearview mirror, you're going to crash into something if you stay there too long, right? So the blame game, it goes on both sides of the fence. We know that. That can go on for days. And as far as, the commentators, that's why they got a job. It's to comment. So, you weigh that in with everybody else. Everybody got something to say, just like us. So I think that, when you talk about the bill that's sitting there, and it's the American Act bill to be able to bring back what's going on. I think it's a little bit of two things. One is, and you're right, we've been talking about this for months, right? And one of the things is that there's a part where it's to assist in the reopening, but it's also to shore up what we know has not been in place to begin with. And so when you have an opportunity like this, that it's like, Atiba-Weza, let's just do it. Let's bite the bullet. Let's put the money where it needs to go, the resources there, not only so they can reopen, but to really start to close that equity gap. The other piece to that, I think, that people are talking about, and you mentioned it, is we don't want to see school districts or states punished for doing the first reopening. They use their own budgets as they saw fit. They should not be expelled, if you will, from any of the funds that should go to replace what they spent. That to me is equitable as well. Right. And so I think there's enough in that 1.9. I even had this crazy notion, and I've been pitching it in every committee that I sit in. It's like, what would really help our school districts is bypass the states and send them straight to the district. There's no overhead. Keep that in the schools so they can do what they need to do. Communities will thrive behind that. And that's not to say without accountability. No one wants to write a check not knowing who they're writing a check to. We get that. But there's just, I think there's an opportunity for new thinking in the way we look at how we fund and what we fund for our schools.
I'm so glad you this is like a great segue to what I was thinking. What are schools going to look like? It's not all gloom and doom, but we have an opportunity to see what education will look like in the future. And so when this money comes, we're not going to go back to what it was. So, so I want to, like shine a bright light on the weaknesses of our, COVID exposed our weaknesses, and expose what we weren't doing right. We weren't ready. We had no bandwidth. We, remote, came upon us, and people were doing things, learning as they go. Teachers were learning how to, paraprofessionals, administrators were all learning how to use this remote Zoom, the Zoom Nation, Microsoft Teams, all of this stuff came out. So are we gonna, how are we gonna restore that confidence in our education system? We need to, first of all, we need to address anxiety about in-person learning. People are still afraid. If I send my Jose, if I send Maria, are they gonna come back? Are they gonna come back with COVID? Are the teachers, and the teachers are afraid, your principals, your administrators, so how do we take away that anxiety by making sure that learning is safe for everyone? And we must acknowledge and address big student social and emotional needs along with the academic needs. It's no longer just doing great in math and English and science. Now it's about, these kids have been, locked up in their homes. I got 4 grandkids, and they are, the aggression, they fight, and it's brother and sister stuff, but they need to go out. They need to be doing their sports, and that's not happening. And that is causing that's going to cause a whole nother world that we haven't really put any attention to the way we should. And then second, we need to say out loud that this very inconvenient truth, and this is what it is, we cannot simply return to old normal. What we used to do, because the old normal just wasn't working, especially for our Latino kids, our English language learner students, families, and communities. We got to look at this in a different way. It's a time, they use that reimagine, but it's a time to thrive. It's a time to look at education in a way. What is it going to look like in the future? We're not going to be all technology. We're not going to be all, reading out loud. Right? Everything is going to change. So how do we do that? And this pandemic has laid bare the deep, pervasive inequalities that have long plagued education and cannot be ignored. We knew that there was an equity issue, but now, I went to Nevada, and when we were on our tour, and there was in one of the towns in Nevada, they had a school bus that had internet because the schools didn't have. And I said, wow, how smart is that? But if they didn't have that school bus with the internet, they could not learn. And that's in it, how can that be in the United States of America? So that's what's happening. And third, we also have to acknowledge that millions of Black and Latino children have been really, really hit hard with this pandemic. They're living in poverty. I attend a church, and my church does pantry. My husband's in charge of the school food pantry every Saturday. The line was from maybe 30 to 40 people to around the corner, 100, 200, 300 people now. And, the lack of, that story I said about Vegas, the lack of basic technology, bandwidth, and adequate broadband, a cell phone is no longer adequate to substitute for learning. So when I think about all that, I take comfort in knowing that under the most difficult circumstances in our lives, America's teachers, America's administrators are guiding young people to think critically, to discern facts from fiction, to appreciate diversity and respect differences, and to develop the muscle to be engaged as great citizens. So that will be our collective job. And just by the mere fact that we are here today with ALAS, AFT, I know we have what it takes to help our children succeed. I know it. And I know we have the intelligence, we have the wisdom, we have the diversity and the imagination to move forward. And I'm looking forward to doing that with you. I really, really am.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that, because one of the, people, you mentioned, exposed, right? Exposed, heightened, alerted. What we have been longstanding issues, Evelyn, and having been in the classroom a long, long time ago, and
Yeah.
moved up the ranks, you see everybody's different. Every teacher has their strengths and has their weaknesses, just like any other person in any other job. And so to think that we are supposed to be the one person who could deliver everything to everybody has always been just, it was always just a curiosity to me. Now, when I came into education, in not like a traditional sense, kind of like you, we had to wait our way. So, I wasn't a youngin' when I got into the classroom. I already had, over a decade of working in private industry, And you take those kinds of learnings into the profession of education. And I used to think way back then, why are we still doing X when we could be doing Z? And so I think about how as an education in America has been such a backseat, right, to quote much more important things, issues that quote matter, when in fact anybody anywhere went to school. At some point in time, they went to school. How could they think that is not a priority for our nation? You mentioned about a hotspot, using buses as a hotspot. And I share this quick story with you. I've worked in California from each border, and up in the mountains of Mendocino, what we call God's country, right? Just sequoias and redwoods like nobody's business. And we had 5 different native tribes that fed into our school district, very small school district, about 5,000 kids. You'd have thought we were in a third world country when I tried to help roll out a one-to-one initiative. But that's what I was hired to do. My soup said, Maria, if you could do that, that'd be great. I'm on it, boss. And so, but that meant I had to basically go arm wrestle AT&T and go and talk to people about opening up the bandwidth so that our schools could have what they needed, so our teachers could utilize the technology we had. And in addition, because we were so spread out and geographically having the antennae, as I like to call it, to be able to bounce the signals, we started to use buses that were hotspots, so that kids, oftentimes it would take them 45 minutes one way to get back to the res. They would at least have that time to be able to do homework and all of that. So that stuff has been around for a while. Why do you think it's taken this pandemic to bring that to light?
Well, we've always had equity issues. I think now it's out there. So now,
there's no going back.
Yeah. So we knew, like you said, you were in California, I was in New York. You could go to the barrios, you knew who had and who didn't have. Those are the high functioning districts.
Right.
So the equity issue has always been there. What I think has happened is it's shameful because now everyone knows about it.
Well, it's in their backyard también, not
Correct.
just ours.
Yeah, so exactly. And that I think has brought a different lens to it, and now they have to address it. Or will they address it?
Thank you.
My goal is that they're going to address it, and that it's up to us. It's very political. That's our reality. That why isn't Wi-Fi treated as a utility? Why isn't it
exactly?
Everyone needs to have it to exist, to learn. It's all
if they can pump cable and make sure that people are watching Days of Our Lives at noon every day, Monday through Friday. Come on now. Come on.
Yeah.
On that note, we're going to come back. We're going to wrap up because I know you have some interesting things to share. But for now, let's just take a quick break.
Hey there, and don't forget, if you like what you hear and want to gain some more insight into what school districts are facing now, then tune in every Thursday at 7 p.m. or subscribe below. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great night.